My son stood in the middle of the kitchen I'd cooked in for 46 years, in the house his father built our whole life inside of, and he said, "Mum, it's time to be realistic. This house isn't yours to hold on to anymore. We need to sell it, and we need to get you somewhere more appropriate. Not yours to hold on to." I was standing right next to the doorframe when he said it, the doorframe where Earl had penciled the children's heights every birthday, little lines and dates climbing up the wood from when Wesley was 3 years old. My son said the house wasn't mine while standing 2 feet from the proof of his own childhood. I didn't argue. I just looked at him, and I smiled the way women my age learn to smile, the one that gives nothing away. Because what Wesley didn't know what he was about to learn in front of a room full of people was that this house had only ever had one name on the deed. And in a few short weeks, that name would be read out loud, slow and clear, and my son would finally understand whose house he'd just tried to push his mother out of. If you've ever been told to let go of something that was yours all along, stay with me, because what happened the day they read that deed changed everything. Let me start at the beginning. Earl Jennings and I bought this house in 1971, on a street nobody wanted, with a down payment we'd saved $1 at a time. Earl drove a delivery truck and did carpentry on weekends, and I cleaned houses across town, and between us we made it work. The house needed everything. Earl fixed it himself, room by room, year by year. He laid the kitchen floor on his knees. He built the front porch where I still sit every evening. And he did one quiet thing that nobody noticed at the time. When the 2 lots beside us came up for sale, junk lots, full of weeds, Earl scraped the money together and bought them both. "Land's patient, Pearl," he'd say. "It'll be worth something when we're old." I thought he was wasting good money on weeds. I was wrong, the way I was usually wrong about Earl, who saw further down the road than I ever could. We raised 2 children here. Our daughter, Cheryl, lives in Chicago now, we talk on Sundays, and our son, Wesley. I need you to know who Wesley was, because it matters at the end. He was a tender boy. He cried at sad movies into his teens. He'd come home from school and tell me every single thing that happened, sitting right there at this kitchen table while I shelled peas. His father marked his height on that doorframe every birthday, and Wesley would stand against it so straight, so proud, stretching his neck to gain a 1/4 inch. The hardness came later. It came with a wife who measured life in the size of a house, and a job that never paid what he thought he deserved, and a slow forgetting of the street nobody wanted, and the dollars we'd saved a cup at a time. It came so gradually that I kept making excuses. A mother is the last one to admit what she's looking at. Earl saw it before I did. About a year before the heart attack took him, he sat me down at this table and held my hand and said, "Pearl, when I'm gone, I want you to promise me you'll keep this house in your own name and never let anybody talk you out of it. Not even him, especially not him." I told him to hush, talking like that. He just squeezed my hand and said, "Walter's got everything. You call Walter when the time comes. He'll know." 5 months later, Earl was gone, and I learned what it means to be an old woman alone in a house that other people have started measuring. The calls from Wesley got fewer, then they only came when he needed something. Tara stopped, including me in things. And the visits, when they happened, had a new flavor. Wesley walking the rooms slow, looking at the ceilings, the floors, the windows, the way a man looks at a thing he's pricing. He started saying things like, "This place is really getting to be a lot for you, Mum," and "the upkeep on an old house like this." I told myself he was being thoughtful. I'm good at telling myself things. What saved me, in those lonely years, was a young man named Theo. Theo had worked for Earl as a teenager. Earl gave a lot of young men around here their first honest job, taught them to measure twice and cut once. Theo was grown now, late 20s, with his own little handyman business, and after Earl passed, he just started showing up. He'd fix the gutter, reset a loose porch board, change the high light bulbs I couldn't reach, and when I tried to pay him properly, he'd take half and say, Miss Pearl, your husband taught me everything I know. You think I'm gonna charge you full price? He'd come back and haunt me. He never once asked me for a thing. He didn't know what I had. I think he figured I was a widow scraping by, and he treated this old house like it was a cathedral worth saving anyway. One afternoon he caught me looking sad, standing by that doorframe with the pencil marks, and he didn't pry. He just said, "You know, my granddad's house got sold out from under my grandmother when he passed. Her own kids did it, told her it was for her own good." He shook his head. She never got over leaving that house. People don't understand. For some of us, the house is the family. It's where everybody still lives, even the ones that are gone. I had to look away from him so he wouldn't see my face. Because nobody in my own family had understood that in 5 years. Theo, who owed me nothing, understood it in one sentence. It was Maya, my granddaughter, who let the first crack show. She's 14, and she has her grandfather's habit of telling the truth even when it's hard. She came by one Saturday, and she was quiet, and finally she said, "Grandma, are you moving?" "Moving? No, baby. Why would I move?" She looked miserable. I heard Dad and Mum talking. Dad was on the phone with a man, and he said the lots were worth almost $2 million to the right developer, and that the only problem was getting Mom to be reasonable about the house. And Mom said, Maya's voice dropped. Mum said, "She'll have to sign eventually. She doesn't even understand what that land's worth." The doorframe blurred for a second. She doesn't even understand what that land's worth. I told Maya she was a good girl and not to worry about grown folks' talk. I sent her home with a jar of my fig preserves, and then I sat down at this kitchen table in the dark, and I did not turn on the light. $2 million. The weed lots Earl bought for almost nothing, getting Mum to be reasonable. I went into Earl's old desk, and in the bottom drawer I found the folder he'd labeled in his careful block print, "House and Lots, Pearl J, Pearl J." Not Jennings' family, not the estate, mine. He'd put it all in my name and told me to keep it there, and I'd half forgotten in my grief, but here it was, his foresight sitting in a drawer, waiting for the exact night I'd need it. My son was trying to sell land that wasn't his to sell, and he was betting on the fact that his old mother was too far gone to notice. I picked up the phone and called the one name Earl told me to call. "I'm trying to reach Walter Boyd," I said. "This is Pearl Jennings." A pause, then a man's voice, warm and gravelly and old. "Pearl, Lord have mercy. Earl told me you'd call one day." A soft laugh. "What's Wesley gone and done?" If you've ever sat alone in your own home and realized the people you raised are quietly deciding to move you out of it, if that cold feeling is sitting in your chest right now, do something for me before we go on. Tap like and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. And tell me down in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me tell you what Walter Boyd showed me. Walter's office hadn't changed in 30 years. Same dark wood, same smell of paper and pipe smoke long gone, same photo on the wall of him and Earl, as young men in front of this very house. Both of them sunburned and grinning. He was past 75 now, slow on his feet but sharp behind the eyes. "Let me tell you what your husband did," Walter said, settling behind his desk with a thick folder. "And why he did it the careful way. It might make you cry. I expect you've earned it." He laid it out plain. "The house, Pearl, and both lots beside it, every bit of it is yours. Sole name. Free and clear. Paid off years ago. Earl recorded that deed himself, downtown. Made sure it was filed exactly right, because he said, and I wrote it down, it's right here. I don't want anybody ever telling Pearl this isn't her house. I want it in black and white at the county where nobody can argue with it." I had to press my handkerchief to my mouth. "Now here's what matters today," Walter went on, gentler. "Wesley has no claim on this property. None. Not a board, not a brick, not a blade of grass on those lots. Which means any deal he's cooking up with a developer cannot happen without your signature, your free knowing signature. He needs you. He just made the mistake of thinking he could get your name without telling you the truth about what it's worth. Walter tapped the folder. And Pearl, between the house and those 2 lots, in this market, you're sitting on close to $2 million. That man's been letting you think you're a widow getting by. And the whole time you've been holding a small fortune in your own 2 hands. I sat very still while that number landed on me in waves. And I'll tell you what it felt like, not riches. It felt like every year I'd believed I was a small woman in a small life on a forgotten street. All those evenings alone on Earl's porch, feeling like the world had set me on a shelf, and the whole time I'd been the richest woman on the block and didn't know the weight of what I held. Earl had built me a fortress out of weed lots and a paid-off house, and then died before he could show me the walls. Why didn't he just tell me plainly? I asked. He did, Pearl. At your kitchen table. He told you to keep it in your name and call me when the time came. Walter took off his glasses. He trusted you to find your backbone when you finally needed it. The question is, are you ready? I thought about Maya. She doesn't understand what that land's worth. I thought about Wesley by the doorframe, not yours to hold on to. I want to understand everything I can do first, I said. And then I'll decide what's fair, not what's angry. I looked at the photo of Earl young and grinning in front of our house. What's fair? Walter smiled, like he'd waited 5 years to hear it. That's exactly what Earl said you'd say. I went home and told no one, and a few days later, Wesley came by, and I learned how far he was willing to go. He brought Tara, which meant it was serious, and a leather folder, which meant it was business, and that warm, managing voice he used on me now, the one you'd use on a child you wanted to keep calm. Mum, I've been thinking, and I really believe it's time, he said, sitting at my table without being asked. This house is too much for you. The stairs, the yard, the repairs. There's a beautiful senior community out by the mall. Tara toured it. You'd have people your own age, activities, no maintenance to worry about. He slid a paper toward me and uncapped a pen. And it just makes sense to let the property go now, while the market's good. I've got everything handled. You don't need to read all the legal stuff. I know it gives you a headache. Just sign where the tabs are and let me take care of you. You don't need to read all the legal stuff. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. Wesley, I said, whose name is on the deed to this house? The smile flickered. Tara's eyes came up sharp. It's the family home, Mum. Dad's house. It's my house. My name. Recorded at the county. I let it sit. Did you know that? A long pause. Then his voice changed, the warmth draining right out of it. Mum, come on, don't make this difficult. Technically, sure, it's in your name, but everybody knows it's a family asset, and the family needs this sale. You're not really able to make these kinds of calls anymore. Be realistic. You're not as sharp as you used to be, and there's nothing wrong with admitting it. We're trying to protect you. Protect. The word every family reaches for right before they take something. Leave the papers, I said. Earl always taught me to read a thing twice before I signed it. Relief crossed his face. He thought the hard part was just getting it on the table. At the door, he turned and delivered the cruelest thing of all, light as anything. And Mum, don't get sentimental about the house. It's just walls and wood. The memories come with you wherever you go. Just walls and wood. He said it standing 6 feet from his own height marks on the doorframe. After they left, I called Walter. He came. He wants me in a home and the house sold. Says I'm not sharp anymore. Walter was quiet a moment. Pearl, has Wesley asked you to sign anything you don't remember signing? Anything at all, these past few months? I thought. There was a stack of papers in the winter. He said it was for the property taxes. I signed 2 or 3 pages without much. I stopped. Walter, why? A long breath on the line. Because a man this determined to push his mother out of a house she owns sometimes decides to stop asking. I want you to come in tomorrow. And I want to pull the county records on your property. Today. His voice had gone hard and careful. If Wesley's filed anything with your name on it, that you didn't knowingly sign, we are going to find it. In plain words, Pearl, I think your son may have decided that getting your signature honestly is taking too long. I looked down at my own hands on Earl's kitchen table. Steady. The same hands that scrubbed other people's floors for 30 years to help pay for this house. He thinks I'm too far gone to check, I said. Then let's go check. What Walter found made my blood run cold. There was a quitclaim deed, filed downtown 3 weeks earlier. A document that claimed I had signed my house and both lots over to Wesley Jennings, transferred the whole property to my son, with my signature at the bottom and a notary's stamp. I had never seen it in my life. That's not my signature, I said, staring at the photocopy. It was close, someone had practiced, but the P was wrong, and I never crossed my J like that. And the date was a Tuesday in February when I'd been in Chicago visiting Cheryl, with the plane tickets to prove it. No, Walter said grimly, it isn't. And the notary who stamped this works out of the same office as your son's developer friend. This, Pearl, is forgery. This is fraud. And it is the single biggest mistake your son has ever made. He set the paper down. Because a forged deed doesn't just fail to take your house, it hands you every card in the deck. Something happened in me then. For 5 years I'd been shrinking, apologizing, making myself small and no trouble. Looking at that forged paper with my own false signature on it, I stopped shrinking. They hadn't just tried to talk me out of my home. They'd faked my hand to steal it while I slept. The grief I'd been carrying turned into something with a spine. I don't want to put my son in a cage, Walter, I said. But I am done letting him build one for me. Tell me what's right. We did it quietly, the way Earl would have. Over a week of evenings at his kitchen table, by lamplight, we put it all in order. The forged quitclaim, Walter prepared to expose the mismatched signature, the notary's connection to the developer, the plane tickets placing me 1,000 miles away the day I supposedly signed. The real deed, the true one, recorded in Earl's careful hand, we had certified and ready. And then I turned to my own will, the one that said who got everything when I was gone, and I made my decisions. The bulk of my estate I directed, after my lifetime, into a fund in Earl's name to help older people being pushed out of their own homes by the people who were supposed to love them, to pay for the lawyers and the deed searches most of them can't afford. I set aside a protected share for Maya, held until she was grown, that no one could ever pressure her to give up. I left a gift to Theo, with a note. You kept this house standing. Now it'll help you build one of your own. And for Wesley, I did the thing I believe Earl would have understood. I did not erase him. I left him a letter and a small fixed gift conditioned on honest living, but not 1 inch of the home he'd tried to forge me out of. Then I made one phone call. I told Wesley he was right, that it was time to settle the house properly, and I asked him to bring everyone, Tara, the developer, even the man's lawyer, to the house on Saturday, around Earl's kitchen table, so it could all be done right with no questions later, and I asked if I might have my own attorney present. Of course, Mum, Wesley said, warm again, certain he'd won, whatever makes you comfortable. I just don't want any confusion, I said softly. There won't be, he said. It'll be perfect. I hung up. And out on the porch, Earl's wind chimes turned in the dark, and I thought, yes, it will be. They gathered at my kitchen table on Saturday, the table Earl ate at for 46 years, Wesley in his good shirt, papers squared, Tara beside him, cool and certain. The developer, a glossy man named Prentice, with a lawyer at his elbow. And down at the end, because Wesley had told her to come, be part of it, 14-year-old Maya, looking like she wanted to disappear. Theo had driven me, I'd asked him, and at the door he squeezed my hand and said, You've got that look, Miss Pearl, Mr. Earl's look. The one that says, somebody's about to learn something. Then he went to wait on the porch. I came in last and sat in my chair, and beside me sat Walter Boyd in a grey suit, with an old leather folder on the table in front of him. Wesley took charge. "Thanks for coming, everybody. Mom, I know this is a big step, but it's the right one, and Dad would be proud to see us handle it like a family." He slid the sale papers toward me and set a pen on top. "So if you'll just sign, we can get the property transferred to me and Mr. Prentice, and we'll get you all settled in your new place. Your lawyer's welcome to watch." He glanced at Walter like he was hired help. Walter Boyd did not pick up the pen. He opened his folder, slow, and settled his glasses on his nose, and said, in the dry, clear voice of a man who'd practiced law for 50 years, "Before anybody signs anything, the deed to this property is going to be read out loud, so there's never any confusion later. Mr. Prentice, you especially will want to hear this." Wesley's smile flickered. "Who are you?" "Walter Boyd. I was Earl Jennings's attorney for 50 years, and his friend, longer than that." He drew out a certified page. "And this," he said, "is the true, recorded deed to this house, and the 2 lots beside it. Let me read it. The property described herein is held solely by Pearl Jennings, in her name alone, free and clear, recorded by Earl Jennings in 1971. He looked up at the developer over his glasses. "One name, Mr. Prentice, hers, not Wesley's. Wesley Jennings does not own a board or a brick of this house, and never has, which means the deal he sold you was never his to make." The developer's glossy smile died. His lawyer leaned in, whispering fast. "Now," Walter went on, and his voice dropped to something cold, "there is a second deed in the county records. A quitclaim, filed 3 weeks ago, claiming Mrs. Pearl Jennings transferred this entire property to her son. He drew out the forgery and laid it on Earl's table. It bears her signature, except Mrs. Jennings never signed it. The signature is forged and I can prove it 3 ways. The P is wrong. The notary shares an office with Mr. Prentice's company. And on the Tuesday this document claims she signed it, in Augusta, Pearl Jennings was in Chicago, Illinois. He set down the plane tickets, one at a time, like cards. I have the boarding passes. I have a handwriting examiner. And I have the recorded original that contradicts every word of this fraud. The kitchen went so silent I could hear Earl's clock ticking in the hall. Prentice stood up, buttoned his jacket, and said, to no one and everyone, well, just that. The sound of a man whose deal and whose problems had just multiplied. He and his lawyer were gone out my front door inside a minute, and I never saw either of them again. Wesley's face had gone grey. "Mom, I can explain." "I don't think you can," I said quietly. I looked at my son, and I felt no triumph. I want to be honest about that. People imagine a moment like this feels like winning. It doesn't. It feels like watching something be buried. 3 weeks ago, I said, you stood in this kitchen, by the marks your father made of your own height, and you told me this house wasn't mine to hold on to. I reached over and laid my hand flat on Earl's table. Then you forged my name to take it while I slept. So today, I just let the deed be read out loud, every word of it, so you'd hear, in plain English, whose house this has always been. Down at the end of the table, Maya was crying, but she got up, and she came around, and she sat beside me and took my hand, and that was the truest thing that happened in that room. The collapse came fast. The forgery was a crime, and Walter made sure the right people knew, though I asked him to hold back from pressing it as far as it could have gone, not to spare Wesley the lesson, but because he was still the boy on that doorframe, and I could not be the one to put him in a cage even after he'd built one for me. Tara, who'd married a man she thought was about to come into $2 million, found out he was instead facing a fraud he'd have to answer for, and she was slow to forgive him for it. They separated within the year. It grieved me. A mother grieves her son's losses, even when he dug the hole himself. I did not gloat. I'd done none of it for revenge, only to keep the home Earl built our life inside, and to send it one day toward people who'd honor it. What I felt mostly, was grief. Not for what Wesley lost, but for the tender boy who used to tell me everything at this table, and who somewhere along the way decided his mother was just a signature in his way. Theo came by that evening, after the worst of it, and sat with me on Earl's porch while the chimes turned. He didn't say he was proud of me. He just said, "House is still yours, Miss Pearl." Then he smiled. Took 'em long enough to find that out. And we sat there not talking, which is the best kind of company there is. A year passed, and my life got fuller instead of smaller. The fund in Earl's name started small and grew, paying for deed searches and lawyers for old folks being pushed out of homes they owned by the very people meant to love them. More of them than you'd believe. Every one of them got the thing I'd nearly gone without. Somebody who read the deed out loud on their side of the table. Theo finally let me help him buy his own little house 2 streets over. He fixed it up himself, the way Earl taught him, and he brings his family for Sunday supper most weeks. I set the places at Earl's table, and the house isn't quiet anymore. Maya comes every Saturday. We sit on the porch, and she tells me everything, the way Wesley used to, and she says she wants to be a lawyer now, the kind who stands between old women and the people trying to forge their names. She says she got the idea from her grandmother. I tell her she got it from her grandfather, and that I only kept his porch swept and his doorframe standing. She says that's the same thing. Maybe it is. And Wesley. About 10 months after that Saturday, a letter came in his slanting hand. "Mum, Walter gave me the letter you left me. You wrote that you forgave me before you ever picked up a pen, and that the door back was always open the day I stopped trying to turn your home into money. I've read it more times than I can count. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know I understand now what I had, and what I tried to do to you to get rid of it. I'm sorry I told you it was just walls and wood. It was never just walls, Wesley." I read it at Earl's table, and I cried, not the quiet, careful tears I'd learned over 5 lonely years, but the other kind. The kind that comes when something you'd buried turns out to still be alive. I haven't put his name on the deed. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and I made my peace with that long ago. But I called him. We talk on Sundays. Last month he asked if he could bring Maya by for supper, the 3 of us, at his father's table, with all the places set. I said yes. It's a beginning. I've learned not to ask any beginning to be more than that. Sometimes in the evening I stand at that doorframe and run my finger over the pencil marks. Wesley, age 3. Wesley, age 7. The proof, in his father's hand, that he was once small and loved in this house and knew it was home. Earl built our whole life inside these walls and put my name on them so no one could ever tell me to leave. I just had to remember that the name on the deed was mine. Here's what I know now, at 73, that I wish I'd known at 68. A house is not just walls and wood, and your life is not just yours to give away under pressure. They'll tell you to be realistic, to let go, to be reasonable, that it's all too much for you now, and those words are not love. They are a door being held open for you to walk out of your own home. You don't have to walk through it. Being agreeable to keep the peace is not the same as being at peace. For 5 years I made myself small so no one would have to make room for me. That isn't humility, it's disappearing. And the people who truly love you will never need you to vanish to feel comfortable. And kindness, the kind that shows up and asks for nothing, that fixes your gutter for half price, because it remembers who you are, is rarer and worth more than any inheritance. When you find it, hold on. That's the family you get to choose. Justice doesn't always knock the door down. Sometimes it just reads the deed out loud, slow and clear, and lets the people who tried to push you out hear, in plain words, whose house it was all along. If this story reached something in you, I'd be grateful to hear it. Have you ever had someone try to move you out of what was yours? Did you find your voice after years of being talked over? Tell me in the comments, your story might help someone else find their spine tonight. And if these stories mean something to you, please like, subscribe, and share. No matter how invisible you've felt, no matter who stopped seeing you, Remember this: your name is on the deed of your own life. Nobody gets to read you out of it. And it is never, ever too late to stand in your own doorway and say, "This is mine."